Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for January 3rd, 2018. On today's show, we're going to be diving into a bunch of news, including the official announcement of a Bright sequel. We'll be taking a look at the state of the movie box office, including 2017 movie ticket sales, female-led films, and the Cloverfield sequel gets pushed back yet again. And in our feature presentation, Hoai-Tran Bui will talk about her top 10 movies of 2017. Has the landscape changed since we talked to her mid-year? We will find out. This is Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film senior writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And Slash Film writer Hoai-Tran Bui.
Hey, everyone.
So, HT, we haven't talked to you since you got back from the new year. What did you do over New Year's Eve?
So I went to a party at my college friend's house where she had bought a saber to open champagne bottles. So this is apparently the way that you're supposed to open champagne bottles, by just slicing off the top. And, you know, alcohol and sharp objects are always a really great combination. But luckily, only 2 people got injured at this party.
Wait,
so
by a saber, you mean like a sword?
It's kind of a sword, but it's more like a machete. It's kind of like the size of a machete, but it's like a sort of serrated on one side and then like just sharp on the other. And you're supposed to kind of get on the seam of the champagne bottle and just lop off the top.
I feel scared enough trying to, get that cork out. But in the way that I think most people do it, I think I'd be so afraid to be, hucking a huge metal object at that. Ben, have you ever done that?
No, I've never done that. I've seen it done before, and I know it's a thing, but I've never actually had the pleasure of doing it myself. HT, did you wield the saber?
I touched it, but I did not wield it. I'm very scared of sharp objects, and just like having a knife pointed at me will send me into like a panic. So it was an interesting party, especially because towards the end, as everyone got a little bit more drunk, the saber started being used to sort of baseball bat some decorative squashes that were at her house. So, and there weren't any injuries aside from like the 2 people who got sort of cut on a champagne glass. But other than that, like it was all safe. It was all in good fun. No one's beautiful dresses were ruined by blood. And yeah, I had a good New Year's.
Do you think in the Star Wars galaxy, do they open celebratory alcohol with a lightsaber?
I hope so.
So, last night I went to the Magic Castle. I just want to mention this briefly. I know people are probably sick of hearing about the Magic Castle on this movie podcast, but it was the 55th anniversary of them opening the Magic Castle. So they had a big Founders Day celebration, and it was a fun night. Laurence Fishburne was there, and like some kind of like kimono kind of dress. And it was fun watching Magic with Laurence Fishburne, and I got to meet the amazing Johnathan, who is a comedy magician that I kind of grew up watching on Comedy Central, and I think 4 years ago he was diagnosed with a life-threatening condition and told that he was only going to live 1 more year. So I never expected to see him again. He's, obviously far surpassed that, and it was a great to chat with him briefly. And he's still performing, shockingly. But anyways, he wasn't performing last night, but it was a fun night. But let's get into the news for what people want to hear about. They want to hear about the movie news. And let's start out with Bright is getting a sequel. We talked about this the other day, but it wasn't official. Now Netflix has officially announced this. HT, what do we know?
So Netflix has officially confirmed that Bright will be coming back for a sequel, a second film that would be helmed by David Ayer as well as written by him. So Max Landis, who wrote the original script that was sold to Netflix for around $3 to $4 million initially, will not be returning for the sequel. So we'll have David Ayer returning to write and direct, and Will Smith and Joel Edgerton returning to star in their roles as the human detective and the orc detective partners. We don't know anything else other than that, when the movie will be coming out, but it's been announced that this is this was Netflix's most popular film, essentially one of their most original, popular original content, the highest viewed Netflix film ever on the service in its first week of release, and one of the biggest originals that it has ever launched. And not only that, but each of the 190 plus countries in which Netflix is available, right, is reportedly the number one movie. And more people have viewed it internationally than they have domestically.
And if you look at Rotten Tomatoes, the audience score is quite high while the critic score is quite low. I have not seen this film. Have either of you watched it yet? I know Ben said he has not watched it.
No, I haven't.
I haven't watched it because I didn't want to contribute to the Netflix algorithm, which obviously aided in the sort of greenlighting of the sequel, because so many people watched it. It was considered a huge success despite a lot of the critical bashing that it got from movie critics, who some called it the worst movie of the year.
Yeah. That makes me almost want to watch it. It is interesting that Max Landis isn't being brought back. I wonder if this has to do with, I think Landis has developed a reputation of sorts studios seem to want to go their own direction with his scripts, and he kind of gets dropped off. Do you know what I mean? Like the collaboration ends at some point. I'm trying to think of the nicest way of saying this. Or if recently there's been some accusations of sexual assault accusations. Nobody has come forward, but there's been murmurs on Twitter, and Landis has been suspiciously quiet. And he's usually, very vocal on Twitter. So I'm wondering if Netflix, a company that had the problems with Kevin Spacey, is preemptively cutting ties with Landis. We don't know. Nobody has come forward, so who knows? But it is interesting that Landis isn't involved. I know he once tweeted that he thought Bright was going to be his Star Wars, which is a ludicrous
which he deleted
thing
too.
Yeah, it's a ludicrous. I think he even realized how ludicrous of a thing that was to say. But I don't know. But more people are watching Bright at home than Star Wars in theater right now. So I don't know. That's sad. It's sad. But let's move on. Let's talk about 2017's movie ticket sales, which, judging by the box office, you're thinking oh my God, Last Jedi is making so much at the box office. Movie theaters must be doing well, but apparently it's the lowest in 25 years. Ben, what do we know?
Yeah, the movie ticket sales in 2017 were the lowest they've been since 1992. So yes, theaters sold fewer tickets last year than in the past 25 years. That's not great. Box Office Mojo reports that 1.23 billion movie tickets were sold between January 1st and December 31st last year, which is down from 1.3 billion that were sold in 2016. I did the math really quickly, and the average number of tickets sold over the past 25 years is 1.4 billion. So it's down, considerably from that. But again, because this is an average, it's not super surprising to me that the number of tickets sold has decreased as the vast array of entertainment options consumers have has increased over the past 10 or 15 or 25 years. So, it all makes sense from a numbers perspective. It's got to be disheartening for movie theaters and exhibitors and stuff to, sort of face the hard truth behind these numbers. But yeah, that's what we're looking at right now.
Yeah, I mean, ticket sales have been on the decline for quite some time. I think if you look at, Box Office Mojo, and you look at even, obviously ticket prices have gone up over the years. 1910, ticket price was 7 cents, and now it's, average $8.93. Not that I see anywhere in Los Angeles that I can pay $8.93 to see a movie. But if you look at, Gone with the Wind, which inflated, adjusted for inflation, is the highest seen movie of all time. That when it came out in 1939 made $198 million, which is nothing today. That's a Star Wars opening weekend. Mm-hmm. But if you do the math, that's something like almost 900 million people saw that movie in theaters, which,
that's insane.
Yeah. Star Wars, what, a couple dozen million. I don't know. It's I think at the end of the run it's probably gonna be like a couple hundred maybe. It's a big change. Obviously there's more options. People wait for home viewing. Also in the news is that while the box office is down, what is leading the box office is women. HT, what do we know?
Yeah, speaking of historic box office sort of feats, the 3 top-performing movies of 2017, Star Wars The Last Jedi, Beauty and the Beast, and Wonder Woman, were all headlined by female leads, making it the first time this has happened in cinematic history since 1958. So that was when the movies South Pacific, which starred Mitzi Gaynor, Auntie Mame, which starred Rosalind Russell, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, which starred Elizabeth Taylor, all ruled the box office for the top 3 movies of the year. So this is a big sort of leap for women, especially regarding sort of the pay gap and everything like that we've seen in Hollywood, but also elsewhere. And it's a very exciting sort of it's an exciting accomplishment for female-led and female-helmed films as well, because Wonder Woman was directed by Patty Jenkins. So, yeah, this is very exciting. This is a big feat. Yes.
When historians look back at this time in this change, do you think where do you think this change first happened? Is it in like the YA, like Twilight and Hunger Games? Is that like the pivotal move towards female-led films doing like really well at the box office?
Yeah, we've started to see a shift more recently with, I think, The Hunger Games, and with also sort of mid-budget comedies like Bridesmaids, where everyone always acts really surprised that women do well at the box office. But we saw that this year as well with Girls Trip. And Hunger Games, I think, was that sort of significant shift because Jennifer Lawrence was headlining this huge action blockbuster that was sort of made to have a female lead and could not have worked otherwise. So it's really exciting that these films are not only do they have female leads who are sometimes part of an ensemble, but they are centered around these female leads. They are not just, sort of like the last year, Scarlett Johansson was the highest grossing actress of the year, but because she was part of Captain America Civil War, part of a large ensemble. But here, Gal Gadot in Wonder Woman, she is the 3rd highest grossing actor of the year total because of Wonder Woman, which is a movie that was centered around her and her character.
And let's move on to our last bit of news, and that is the untitled Cloverfield sequel that was titled God Particle has been pushed back yet again. Is this the 4th time that's been pushed back, Ben?
I think that's true. So let's run through it real quickly. So after 10 Cloverfield Lane came out, which was sort of a semi-sequel that was kind of set in the same universe and kind of not to the original Cloverfield, which came out in 2008. 10 Cloverfield Lane came out, I think it was 2016, the beginning of 2016. And God Particle was supposed to come out in February of 2017, and then that ended up getting pushed back to October of 2017 and then to February of 2018 after some reshoots, which were supervised by producer J.J. Abrams. But February 2nd, 2018 is less than a month from now, and we were like, why haven't we seen any trailers for this? What's going on here? So we reached out to Paramount yesterday and found out that the now untitled Cloverfield movie, again, God Particle is not its real name at this point anymore. We don't know what the real title of it is, but we now know that the movie is going to be opening on April 20th, 2018, so about 4 months from now. The decision was made very, very recently because, as far as we know, on December 19th, the movie was still supposed to be opening on February 2nd. So I think this happened maybe over the holiday break. Paramount decided, hey, let's kick this thing back a little bit.
And it's weird when people are complaining that we haven't seen a Han Solo image or trailer or anything, and that's out in 5 months or something. Mm-hmm. This movie was literally on track to come out a month from when Paramount was still saying that was the date, and we have not seen anything from it. J.J. Abrams, I think, supervised some reshoots. There's some rumors behind the scenes that the movie is kind of a mess, but I don't know. It's weird because at this point, pushing a film back 4 times, I don't know. I can't think of a time that has happened in the recent past. It just seems like that's at this point, why not just dump it on VOD if it's
and I think the only thing recently that I can think of is like Amityville: The Awakening, I think is what it was called. We were talking about that a month or two ago on the podcast. That one got bumped, and I think eventually they did just release it for free on like Google Play or something like that. So hopefully whatever this Untitled Cloverfield movie is, it's not bad enough to just get unceremoniously dumped like that. But yeah, I mean, it's got a great cast. David Oyelowo, John Ortiz, Chris O'Dowd, Gugu Mbatha Raw is supposed to be in it, Zhang Ziyi. So I'm excited about the idea of all those people getting together for a movie that's sort of quasi set in this universe. But again, we still don't really know any hard details about what the movie actually is. So we'll have to wait and see what they do.
And we're going to take this moment to thank you, Ben. We're going to leave you here before we get into our feature presentation. Where can people find more of your work?
You can find me on slashfilm.com, and you can track me down on Twitter at Ben Pears.
And now for our feature presentation, Hoai-Tran Bui is going to tell us about her top 10 movies of 2017. Let's get into it with number 10, The Post.
Yeah, so my 10th choice is The Post, and it was kind of a reaction to this old Spielberg that I knew and loved when I was growing up, and I miss sorely. And I felt like I saw the return of that director who was behind masterpieces like E.T. or the Jurassic Park with The Post. It's stirring, it's suspenseful, it's just the right amount of sentimental, and it can be a little bit on the nose, but I think it's the amount of on the nose that we need in sort of these trying times, because it's definitely a film that's very timely. And I really like that it's such a dynamic film. It's something that Steven Spielberg directs like an action film almost. And all the character actors and actors who are in the film are great. It's sort of like seeing a master director and a master class of actors sort of have this elegant dance, especially with Tom Hanks, Meryl Streep, and character actors like Bob Odenkirk, Matthew Rhys, and Carrie Coon, who are all just fabulous and excellent in this film.
I almost wish that Meryl Streep was given the like the lead role in this. It feels like kind of heavy on Tom Hanks when I feel like the big decisions in this movie are hers. And I know this film is largely hers, but if I have one complaint, I think that's my one complaint about that movie. And I definitely like this film.
Yeah, I could see that too, because she and Tom Hanks kind of share sort of equal screen time, but in the end, Tom Hanks is sort of Spielberg's favorite, and he kind of gets a little bit more of the narrative juice. But I do like seeing Kay Graham's sort of arc from being this uncertain woman who's in charge for the first time and has been told all her life that she really can't step up, finally have that moment of like that eureka moment where she makes a huge decision to publish the Pentagon Papers and step up. And it's a really inspiring moment for me.
And before you email us about spoilers, this is real life history, guys. If you don't know that happened, then I don't know. You should just go read history books for a while. But okay, moving on to your number 9, and that is Okja. I have not seen this yet.
Really? It's on Netflix, Peter.
I know. It's just for some reason or other, I have not gotten to it.
So Okja was on my list at the midway point of the year. It's a little bit lower now, but I still like it just as much, just because I feel like Bong Joon-ho kind of is completely unpretentious when he approaches his vision for this film. It's just weird, it's wild, it's a madcap adventure that combines this tender girl and her pig adventure story with a somewhat clunky narrative about capitalist greed and conservation and cultural miscommunication. But Tilda Swinton and Jake Gyllenhaal are great and over the top in it. I really enjoy their performances, though people don't really like how ridiculous and hammy they get. I think it really works in the context of this movie and the fact that they're kind of doing a more Korean style of acting, which goes in line with sort of like this cultural clash that we see in Okja.
And number 8 on your list is Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman is a really special movie to me. I would put it higher if it weren't for that terrible third act, but I just I have a huge emotional connection with Wonder Woman because it was a movie that really shifted my perspective of what a blockbuster movie can be. I feel like sort of my tepid response to other really great blockbusters that I've seen this year have been sort of in response to how great Wonder Woman was and how I was able to see all these complex, fierce female characters on the big screen for the first time depicted in a way that wasn't gaudy or sort of sensual or overly sensual in a way that male gaze often is. And it felt very empowering, and I felt like that was an experience that cannot be weighed against that could weigh against the sort of the problems with the plot and the narrative and everything. But I really love Wonder Woman. I think it's definitely one of my favorite movies of the year, and it would be higher if it weren't for the poor CGI of the third act.
and the poor plotting, I think. But
I will defend the plotting. I will defend the plotting. I think it's a fine, good plot that is made fresh because of the content, and though we've seen it before, there's nothing bad about something being familiar or derivative, as long as something new is done with it.
And I've seen a lot of men, not just in critics, but fans kind of write this film off. And it's a shame because, yes, it does have that third act, which I do agree is a problem. But I think, and saying this as a man probably doesn't hold any weight, but we've seen all these male superheroes on the big screen before, and I can't imagine what it would be like to be a woman and not have that and finally get this. So it's,
It's something I never knew I was craving before, but when I finally saw it, I was like, wow, so this is what it feels like.
Yeah. And number 7 on your list, Lady Bird.
Yes, number 7 is Lady Bird, which is just a phenomenal coming-of-age film, as well as this really sort of devastating portrait of this tense relationship between a mother and daughter. And it's something that I went to see with my mother, which gave it another added layer. And it felt very much like a fresh and familiar film to me, just because it was set in a sort of arbitrary year, 2003, which was the year that me and many other women who were seeing it sort of grew up. And I felt like that intensely personal take that Greta Gerwig brings to it really elevates the film and makes it more than just a typical indie slight coming-of-age film. Saoirse Ronan's amazing in it, as it's Laurie Metcalf, and it has this really warm heart to it that I think sort of cuts through its self-effacing irony that comes with the genre.
This is also one of my favorite movies of the year, and if you have not seen this film, I would head out to theaters while it's still on the big screen and check it out. It is kind of scary that they're already doing period films in the early 2000s. It makes me feel super old, but yeah. And also looking at your list here, it is kind of worth mentioning how many of these movies have female leads in them. I'm not sure if that's something that you have self-processed.
That wasn't intentional, but it was just something that sort of came about because I connected personally with these movies. And I think that with everyone's top favorite movies, it should be movies that they connect personally with, or at least that really speak to them. And for me, it's like, this isn't the best movies of all time list or the best quantifiable movies of this year, but it's just movies to me that mattered the most and resonated the most.
And one of the films that was on your half of the year list was Get Out, and that makes your end of the year list at number 6.
Yes, Get Out is a great film. It's both a crowd pleaser and a genuinely great horror film, and I really love that we're seeing more social commentary come through these genre films, especially this one that does such a sharp commentary on systemic race and privilege, and turns sort of like the little microaggressions that we see with mixed race people and couples every day turn into tangible plot points. And it comes off as both a comedy and a horror film, and I really like that mishmashing of genres.
And I know I've said this before, I love the social commentary in this film, but I don't feel like as a horror film or as a comedy film it's exceptional. But I love what it does with the social commentary. Let's move on to your number 5, and that is Dunkirk.
Yes. So I called in my list Dunkirk pure cinema. And I'm going to explain why. I think that Dunkirk really makes use of what movies and films, same thing, can have the potential to do. It really tests the limits of what the movie-going experience can be. It's almost like a 4D film because, like Christopher Nolan said before, it's supposed to be an experience rather than a traditional story, which was something I kind of scoffed at when I first heard, but it truly is a really visceral experience that feels like being dropped into the middle of World War II. And it's through the auditory, sensory, combination of things. Like when you see it in IMAX, you feel like your teeth are going to like rattle out of your head and you feel like your eardrums are going to explode. But it's something that I think really makes full use of what storytelling can be in cinema. And it's something that can only be like Christopher Nolan said, it's best seen in theaters. I hate being that sort of pretentious person who's like, you have to watch this on the big screen, IMAX. But it's just such a great use of technology in cinema because it's such a bare bones story and Christopher Nolan's most emotional movie, I would say.
You know, this is a film that I don't love, but I agree that it is a film that I think has to be seen on an IMAX big screen, which saying that now probably is like saying fuck you to everybody listening to this that didn't see it because they're never going to get that chance of seeing it in an IMAX screen at this point. But I don't know. I think I like this movie a lot, but what really bothers me is the structure of the film, which is so Chris Nolan, doing those 3 different stories and 3 different kind of time lengths or settings. Kind of is like an FU to storytelling. It kind of is jarring. It basically, it doesn't, for me, put me into the stories of these people. It actually takes me out of like I'm trying to figure out what is going on when. Do you know what I mean? Like it's more confusing than yeah. So that's my complaint.
I could see that. I think the timelines for the most part were largely unnecessary in Dunkirk because I think it does sort of go against his central thesis of trying to tell the stories on the ground of these soldiers and just kind of these snapshots of these people at certain moments in time. It works, I think it works sort of structurally in terms of like the building of the climax and the building of suspense, but I do think it kind of takes away from the bare bonesness of it all. So I kind of hand wave it off. It works for me, and I think it kind of makes sense for how he structured the film, but it's not an essential part of the film, I think.
And let's talk about your number 4 film, and that is Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water.
I love The Shape of Water, and I know people are going to be, people who follow me on Twitter at least may be surprised that it's not my number 1 pick, but it is a really gorgeous fairy tale romance that takes this sort of B-movie creature feature and expands it into this weird and whimsical Cold War setting. And I feel like it's the perfect sort of distillation of what Guillermo del Toro does best. He has kind of been knocked before for always having these really ardent homages and love letters to genre. Crimson Peak, I think he was kind of criticized for it being such an homage to genre that there was no story in it. But I think Shape of Water is the real culmination of all of those sort of criticisms that he's had and his strengths as a director in that he can pull off all of these sort of love letters to classic cinema, to B-movie creature features, to sort of like his idea of the American dream, as well as like this overarching narrative of the fairy tale romance, and he brings it all together in a really beautiful and lush film. And I absolutely adore Sally Hawkins in The Shape of Water. She gives a phenomenal performance as a mute lab worker, and she definitely anchors the film. No pun intended. as despite having nothing, not being able to say anything, just because she's so expressive, and her eyes have she has such great eyes. She can just really emote so well. And Doug Jones is also great as the amphibian man. Richard Jenkins, Michael Stuhlbarg is just, and Michael Shannon, of course. They're all such a great cast. I know people have criticized it for being somewhat broad and a little bit cold, kind of expecting the audience to do the heavy work in believing or projecting the romance between Eliza and the amphibian man. But I completely believe it, and I think that it's something that works so well, especially as sort of allegory for the oppressed minorities and the outsider story as well.
Yeah, I think this film is beautiful, and I don't think it's going to make my top 10, but just slightly, just like by like one or two, off the top 10. But I think the story doesn't envelop me as much as maybe Pan's Labyrinth or his other films, but it's just such a beautiful movie, and it's amazing that it was accomplished for under $20 million. I just can't, seeing every frame of that movie looks like, so much art. Yeah.
I'm really curious as to what your top 10 will be, because Jacob was mentioning this earlier, but all of our favorite movies are completely different and there's barely any overlap. So this is going to be a really interesting year for our separate top 10s.
For sure. And number 3 on your list is Your Name. This is a film that didn't this come out last year, or am I misremembering?
It came out in Japan in 2016.
Okay,
but was released in the U.S. in 2017, April 2017, if I am correct. Yes.
Okay.
So Your Name was at the top of my list at the midway point, and it's definitely still up there. It's a beautiful, cerebral slice of life / coming of age film that kind of begins as your standard body swap comedy, but then unfolds into this trippy and metaphysical meditation on fate and time. It's very beautiful, stunningly animated. I've talked about this movie plenty of times on the podcast before, but Makoto Shinkai is one of my favorite anime directors now, and I think that he makes full use of animation as a medium through which we can test the limits of how it can tell stories. I was speaking before about how Dunkirk really tested the limits of cinema, and I think Your Name does so in a different way, but in a way that really breaks the boundaries of filmmaking, because it does a lot of things that live action filmmaking can't do, and I think that that's what the strength of animation is. And I really appreciate when Your Name or animated movies strive to tell really ambitious stories, but still keep it rooted in this really familiar story about first love, first heartbreak, this sort of melancholy of missing someone that you never really knew, and brings it onto another higher abstract level.
I was really expecting this to be your number 1 of this year. Number 2 on your list is another movie that I guess to be on your top 5, you got to have Your Name in the title. It's Call Me by Your Name.
Yeah, I wondered if people would get confused because I had Your Name and Call Me by Your Name immediately after the other, but I absolutely loved Call Me by Your Name. It feels like I kind of said this in my article. It sounds a little pretentious when I read it out loud, but it feels like waking from a beautiful dream. It's this hazy, feverish, sort of sumptuous film that is filled with this sort of inexplicable emotion. It's helped by the fact that Luca Guadagnino, I don't know how to pronounce his name, the director.
Not even going to try.
He has this sort of cold approach to the entire movie, despite it being set on this warm Italian countryside. He observes the performances of Armie Hammer and Timothée Chalamet from a distance, as they have this sort of slow burn courtship and first love that kind of happens really slowly. I guess it makes sense when I say slow burn, but it goes in line with the whole through line of them studying these Greek expression statues and observing them for their beauty and their artistry. And it kind of becomes this almost beautiful portrait that you see from afar, and almost feels a little bit too cold in the end until you get to Michael Stuhlbarg's monologue. Shout out to Michael Stuhlbarg for being in 3 of my top 10 movies, by the way.
Yeah.
He is phenomenal in Call Me By Your Name. He is honestly the saving grace for this film, because his monologue at the end was really this explosive moment that just wrapped the entire movie all together for me. He gives this monologue about appreciating what you had and realizing that maybe you will never have it again. This sort of connection that's a once in a lifetime connection. And I saw a meme about it recently. That's why I'm laughing. But it's a really beautiful monologue, and it brought me to tears, and I kind of am realizing now that I rated a lot of my movies based on how much they made me cry. But I think that that monologue and this movie in itself is a really beautiful ode to the beauty of life in both ecstasy and pain.
For sure. And I think people are probably wondering at this point, what is your number one film of 2017?
My number one film is The Florida Project. The Florida Project is a movie that completely caught me by surprise. I went in seeing it not knowing much about it, and I was left completely emotionally wrecked at the end. And it's saying that it sounds like it's sort of a emotionally manipulative, sentimental film, but it's far from that. It's kind of a beautiful examination of poverty in the periphery of Florida's Walt Disney World, and it's kind of examining these hidden homeless who live in the motels surrounding the theme park, and who live day to day living in these motels that have become sort of like slum-like in their conditions, but really make the best of it.
They're not really homeless, right? Or
it's like the hidden homeless. I actually read this really great article about it, because they don't have permanent homes or anything. They live in these
I guess technically
temporary
right.
residences.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So they are on the verge of homelessness. But it's a really wonderful depiction of poverty. And I think it's a profound portrait of poverty, but also of humanity. Because the film isn't about this really maudlin, impoverished family, but it's told from the perspective of a young girl, Mooney, played by Brooklyn Prince, who is amazing in it.
Oh, she's great.
She's just amazing. She has this really whimsical, lighthearted approach to life, and she seems blissfully unaware of the conditions that she lives in. She just kind of runs around wild and free, and engages in all sorts of mischief, some legal, some not. And it becomes this sort of slice of life film. I said slice of life a lot in my list so far, and you can tell this is the kind of film that I really appreciate, because there's no real narrative to it. It kind of just floats aimlessly along, but I think it's a wonderful sort of love letter to life in that regard, despite being about these lower echelons of society who you wouldn't really think about, the dregs, you might say. But the Florida Project is it's a wonderful ode to them, and will make you come to appreciate life more so because of how much life is appreciated through the eyes of this young, poor girl. And I will defend the ending of the Florida Project. I know,
which we shouldn't get into because people probably have not seen it. But I don't love the ending. I do love the film. I do want to say that we have seen a lot of films that I think portray kind of like this lower class, slum slice of life kind of thing, but usually they're kind of told from the perspective of the adult. And I think the interesting thing here, for me at least, was seeing these moments play out from the perspective of the children, and what they see and what they don't see, and what they don't understand and what they do understand, and what they make of it. And that to me was beautiful.
Yeah, it reminds me of Room, starring Brie Larson and Jacob Tremblay. And that was a movie that I expected to be really hard-hitting and hard to watch, but it was actually almost I want to say entertaining, but it was a really compelling film because it was told from the point of view of Jacob Tremblay's character, who views like this whole room as his world, and it's very magical in that sense. And I think the Florida Project has that sort of childhood wonder and magic to it, despite being about such a harsh conditions and harsh life.
So if you want to read Hoai-Tran Bui's full article, you can do so on slashfilm.com. It's linked in the show notes. There's obviously more insight than she was able to provide on this audio podcast. And obviously, if you're looking to reference some of the movies she mentioned, which I'm sure people are like, what's that anime? Your Name? You can go to that list and find out. HT, where can people find more of your work online?
You can find me at slashfilm.com, and I'm on Twitter at HTranBui.
You can find me at slashfilm.com, at slashfilm on Twitter. You can find this podcast published every weekday on iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, all the popular podcast apps. If you have a question, comment, concern, please email us, peter@slashfilm.com. That's peter@slashfilm.com. Leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention the email on the air. Please go rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Spread the word, tell your friends, and we'll see you tomorrow.